What do the recent antitrust lawsuits against big tech mean to digital marketers? What you need to know about what is to come right now on The Edge.
Go! Your weekly digital marketing trends with industry trend-setting guests. Powered by your digital marketing pioneers, Site Strategics. This week's featured guest is Sam Tomlinson, Executive Vice President at Warshawski. Now, here's your host, Aaron Sparks.
This is Edge of the Web Radio. I'm your host, Aaron Sparks. Welcome back to Edge of 2021. Every week we actually bring you amazing guests to chat with about trending digital marketing topics. We unpack a key marketing topic for our digital marketing audience, and whether you're part of a firm, part of an agency, or a freelancer, this show is for you. So check out all the show information over at edgeofthewebradio.com. That's edgeofthewebradio.com. You'll be able to find out everything that we're doing and who our upcoming guests are. The show is actually brought to you by Site Strategics, our parent company and title sponsor of Edge of the Web. We're the pioneers in agile digital marketing. Our core specialties are SEO, social media marketing, conversion rate optimization, and the omni-channel media broadcast. That's what we do here at the studio each and every week. Our focus is agile marketing, results-based marketing that actually works. So if you're interested in what we can do for you, check us out at 877, well, give us a call, I should say. You can't really check out a phone number. Give us a call at 877-SEO for web or 877-736-4932. Want to let you know who's going to be coming up on the show here soon. We're going to be talking to Jason Bonnard, as well as Fernando Angula of SEM Rush, as well as Dan Sharp from Screaming Frog. Certainly want to unpack that software. It's a mainstay for any SEO, and we're going to be able to celebrate his 10-year anniversary of the software and get into some of the specifics of how you can use it for your SEO betterment. If you're interested in if you're interested in being part of the show, just drop us a line over at info@edgeofthewebradio.com. Set your reminders for YouTube, so whenever you see those reminders, you know we've dropped another video, and we're also dicing up our shows into even more snackable pieces for your consuming pleasures. So let us know how we're doing on that front. Be sure to check out our digital marketing news that we release each and every week on Tuesday. We cover 3 top news stories, as well as get some expert input and subject matter expert on that on a regular basis. It's a short podcast, and we're dialing it in to make sure that you can get your news the way you want it on audio. And we also have a news blog and what have you. So check that out over at Edge of the Web Radio. But certainly subscribe to our feed, because we're throwing in a lot of great audio on a regular basis. All right. That said, we wanted to roll out the red carpet for our first interview in 2021. And what a day has been today. We want to make sure that we got a guest on here that is not afraid of controversy, and that is the indomitable Sam Tomlinson. How you doing, sir?
I'm good. I mean, after that, I guess I have to be great.
Yeah, you're going to have to swing for the fences, Sam. Let's introduce you to our audience. Sam is the Vice President in Digital Strategy and Digital Analytics over at Warshawski. Sam actually oversees client accounts and is responsible for both strategic direction and execution of all integrated digital marketing over there. He's worked there for 7 years in business and data and analytics, digital marketing and strategy, and he currently serves as the VP and head of data analytics teams over there. So tell us a little bit about Warshawski, if you would.
Sure. So Warshawski is a global boutique digital communications agency. Mm-hmm. We're located in Baltimore. We have offices in New York and DC, but we work with clients all around the globe. Cool. So I've gotten really good at this time travel, or this time zone kind of game where you
time travel. Did he say time travel?
Time travel. Yeah. I was just watching Avengers last night, so like time travel's on the brain. But, we work with a wide variety of clients. We have everything from, Series A startups through public companies. Mm-hmm. It's a diverse group. We do a lot of the same things that you guys do, Aaron, sure, over at Site Strategics, but it's, my groups are the digital media group. So we do paid search, paid social, programmatic display, video, right, conversion rate optimization, landing page development, web development. And then, as an agency, we also offer the traditional advertising. So we're, running national TV campaigns for brands. We do PR, which is kind of where we got our start, creative, et cetera. So it's a fully integrated operation. And, always happy to work with great companies.
Absolutely, absolutely, and you certainly are killing it. And a continued contributing member into a number of organizations. You're part of the Digital Analytics Association. You're a frequent columnist over at Marketing Insider, Convince and Convert, and Duct Tape Marketing. Any other areas that you contribute?
I've been on SEJ a couple times, so I do that, and then just the speaking circuit.
Yep.
So I think that's kind of where we hung out last. Was somewhere
pre-COVID. It was San Jose over at SMX last year, 2020, and had a nice dinner there.
A year ago.
I remember hanging out for steaks.
Yeah, we had some steaks and good stuff.
We had steaks. That was good.
And boy, the speaking circuit certainly has changed. Give me your take on. Literally, it's flatline for lack of a better description. But what's going on? I mean, are you still able to engage? Are you been part of the virtual circuit now?
Yeah, definitely. So I've been doing the virtual stuff. A couple of the conferences that I was scheduled to speak at went completely virtual. So was really thrilled to be able to do that.
Cool.
Just most recently was Search Marketing Australia, which I think went live sometime in December. But time is weird now. So
yeah, because you're time traveling.
Exactly. See, you get it.
Time doesn't matter anymore. We can rack up those virtual conferences like nobody's business. So our heart really goes out to groups like Third Door Media and other conference organizations. Because part of this fabric, it literally is a connective tissue across the entire world. Be able to touch base and be able to sit down, just like we had dinner back in San Jose. Just be able to talk and rub elbows with the people that we only know over social. And social certainly has grown, but man, we're missing those days to be able to connect. Yeah.
Yeah. It's so much easier, honestly. Like, it's nice to be able to go to a conference to see the people that you talk to all the time, to exchange ideas. And virtual's fine, but it's not the same.
No.
I don't think it's supposed to be, right? It's supposed to be different. Like, the whole point of going to a conference or going to an event is that whole experience that you just kind of create the environment.
Yep, absolutely.
It sucks.
It does suck. But
looks like we're on the rebound, right?
Yes, absolutely. And
there's like a vaccine thing now, so that's cool.
We will will this into existence, hopefully. And we actually talked to George Wynn over Third Door this last week, and they've got some things in the works. Not only the regular scheduled conferences, they're thinking about a few more here this year. Can't give away how many they're going to have, but we even asked them, hey, is there a plan B or hopefully a plan A of hitting boots on the ground at a conference, right? So they got to eyeball that, and we hope for the best on all fronts and all the organizations out there. Anyway, that's where we met, and we certainly wanted to connect with you and had some great talks back in San Jose. You also came on the show here last year talking with Kirk Williams as we were going over another set of controversies out in the Google ad space, right?
Yeah, that was fun.
It was. So we want to get you back because something else is bubbling to the surface, Sam. It's antitrust lawsuits inside of against big tech. And we knew we needed to go to you to really kind of unpack that and open up a Pandora's box of commentary. So federal regulators and state attorneys have expressed growing unease in the big tech and just the power of technology giants, right? It's obvious. We're hearing it all the time. So
that's where you start usually, right?
Yeah, pretty much. They start getting pissed off, and there's a lot of struggles. There's been a lot of struggles on how to actually bring a case because it's complex, and there's a lot of markets that are actually being competed in. Arguing that the firms are actually harming consumers, it's pretty challenging because of all the different areas in which big tech plays. So what I wanted to first do is help our listeners who may not even be familiar with what antitrust is, kind of give a description of this as well as what are some examples of antitrust. So first and foremost, an example of antitrust was back in 1872, Standard Oil with J.D. Rockefeller. right? This is where everything started to originate from. He was head of his trust, and he was offering his competitors two choices: either join us or be destroyed. Kind of like the Borg, right?
Yeah,
So
it was.
Go ahead.
Good old-fashioned shakedown.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it was. God bless America.
Well, fast forward. I mean, the whole point is trusts are large organizations, and the concept is a misnomer. Or it can be perceived as one. We're not talking about trusting these organizations; these are trusts, and the point of this is to help protect diversity and competition in the marketplace, and don't allow large organizations to scoop up smaller ones. So there was a Microsoft case that was another famous example here that came up over the last decade and a half, when the tech companies started bundling products such as Windows and Explorer, their browser at the time. They ran afoul of the law, but they still allowed other options to exist, Apple and such. So consumers had choices to purchase different browsers, different platforms, but they still got stung. And the company actually lost about $70 billion in the marketplace because of the injunctions that were put on Microsoft from that. So what's happening now? We've got Amazon, we got Apple, we got Google and Facebook, and the EU's taking Amazon on right now. There's a slew of cases coming out. 48 attorney generals, and the Federal Trade Commission just went after Facebook. And there are also two fresh AG cases from the Justice Department against Alphabet, the parent company of Google. All right, so tee this up to me, Sam. What in the world is happening on big tech? Why are these organizations target for antitrust attacks from government and lawsuits?
Yeah, I think it's a big question, right?
Yeah,
but I think you start with you had a good primer there. Like, antitrust is intended to ensure that marketplaces are healthy and functioning as markets.
Right.
And what you've seen in a really short order of time, it's quite frankly unprecedented in the history of capitalism, is the explosion of tech, right? You go from, when I was born or I was in elementary school, tech was a cool, nice to have, fun little thing. And this is the mid 90s, right? I was in elementary school, late 90s.
Okay, then, you don't need to rub that in. Thanks. I appreciate it.
Right, yeah, I'm just saying. But it's there and it's kind of interesting, but it's not anything critical to 2010. And tech is pretty much the backbone of the U.S. economy at that point. Just no one knows it yet.
It's moved into almost like a utility, right?
Yeah, it's become, in some sense, a utility, but it's core to the operation of the economy, to now where, really the mega caps that are dominating and in some ways kind of contributing the most value to the U.S. economy are tech. I mean, if you look at the largest companies on the planet by market cap, they're tech.
Right.
It's Amazon, it's Apple, it's Facebook. I mean, that's just
absolutely.
where it's.
All right, keep on going.
And when you go from that, you end up in this weird situation where you basically propped up a huge industry with nothing to support it. I mean, and every other industry that we talk about that's really heavily regulated, finance, auto, et cetera. Mm-hmm. Every one of them grew up over decades. And as they grew up and as they got more sophisticated and as they got more central, regulation caught up correspondingly.
Right.
With tech, you have this kind of dual problem with, number one, it's gone from cool, but interesting, but not really essential, to mission critical in a really short period of time. Meanwhile, you end up in this situation where regulators and lawmakers don't understand it. They don't know what to do about it. They are both trying to take advantage of it for their own personal ends and regulate it because they don't want to get screwed by it.
Right.
And the result was nothing happens, right? So you have no regulation from a critical industry, and now everyone's like, oh my God, they've gotten too big. Mm-hmm. Facebook is almost $1 trillion company. Apple is well over $1 trillion company. Amazon's $1 trillion company.
Yep.
These are huge, huge, huge enterprises. So now you end up with the if you go with Heidegger, right, you start with this thesis, you go to the antithesis, now we have to get to a synthesis. So the thesis was big tech becomes huge. The antithesis, the swing back of the pendulum, so to speak, is, oh my God, antitrust lawsuits everywhere.
Right.
And now we're trying to figure out where do we settle in the middle. And I think that's kind of the big picture of what a lot of people that think about tech and antitrust and where is this going are trying to think about now and trying to figure out, because that where we end up is critical for all of us moving forward in the digital advertising industry, as consumers, as users of digital products, as the digital products themselves in some instance.
But the critical thing here is, and that's why I started up with where antitrust came from back in 1872 or what have you. These laws are archaic. These laws, to your point, haven't caught up with tech. So even looking at big tech in the perspective of they're too huge because they're making too much money, or they're omni-platform, right? The old laws have no connection to what is happening. I mean, it's not even a pendulum. The paradigm has changed completely. It's not just a shift. It literally is an explosion of tech. And we not only do we not have regulations to help protect customers, but it's never been done before. And there's so many new concepts in digital that have never existed on the face of the planet. You can't govern with a tool set that has no bearing on, it has no context into what we're dealing with on the digital front. Yeah?
I mean, I think it's a different approach, right? Like the US approach to antitrust, like you mentioned, is firmly rooted in this kind of judicial legal concept of, we prove a wrong, a violation of the law. So in this case, the applicable laws are the Sherman Act of 1890 and then the Clayton Act of 1914, which was amended in 34. But these are almost a century old laws, or more than a century old in the case of the Sherman Act. And we prove a violation of law, and then we elect remedies to solve or to address those, right? That's the US model. The European model is actually really different. And the European model is mostly like, we find something we don't like, we make laws. Get over it.
And then move on.
And that's kind of how we got to GDPR, but that's not the only issue, right? Like, we saw the other really famous antitrust case is the AT&T Big Bell case.
Exactly, yeah.
And Europe approached that really differently than the US did. The US just kind of fractured AT&T into the 7 baby bells, which were local monopolies, and then created a market for long distance. Europe basically treated it like a utility and sold the last mile distribution and required those companies to provide access, and basically created a market for that consumer connect.
Right.
And if you look at which one of those results was actually healthier long term, it's a pretty compelling case that the European model there actually worked significantly better than the American model.
Absolutely.
Because you have, in almost every instance in Europe, the dominant country at the time this proposed change was created and enacted is not the dominant company now. And in the U.S., that's not always the case.
None of those bells exist except one, I think, from that original judgment. So today's technology is completely much more complex than it was at the time of the Bell system, IBM, and Microsoft. It's just not the same scenario. So there are, at the root of these concepts are still things that are principles that apply. We want to solve a lack of competition, right? We want to solve also privacy in this space is a key factor. And that's a whole nother discussion. But beyond that, for digital, the users of social media are vulnerable to be fed misinformation from these platforms as well. And you also have something else that has never existed, a full controlled ecosystem from literally, what do you want to start from the ad environment to the services that the services that can actually also compete for the same business that the advertisers are actually applying for. So you've got almost a fully controlled ecosystem in certain cases like Google and Facebook where they serve as the pitcher, the catcher, as well as the ref in these environments, right?
Yeah.
So new laws have to be enacted. New concepts along these laws have to be embraced. You just can't bring a giant hammer to just break up a company, especially when innovation is at the heart of this, right?
So I think so. I mean, I think the biggest thing that gets lost in this whole debate is that this isn't simple.
Nope.
This is there's like this native like default that we have to go to the simplest possible concept. But the reality, like you mentioned, there's a lot of competing factors. There's a lot of trade-offs. Mm-hmm. So I love the H.L. Mencken quote. For every complex problem, there's always a solution that's simple, easy, and wrong. And in this case, the break them all up is simple, easy, and wrong.
Yep.
The do nothing is simple, easy, and wrong. And that puts us in this weird position where now we have to start talking about the trade-offs. There is always a trade-off between security and privacy, right? Yep. We've talked about this in national defense. We've talked about this in law. We've talked about this in law enforcement, to be candid. But that's a trade-off, right? There's always a trade-off between scale and customer affordability. The bigger the scale, the cheaper the prices can get. But the smaller the scale, the more a local small business can compete, right? So you have all these interesting trade-offs. And at the core of it, you have to, I think, get clear first about what is the problem you're trying to solve.
Right.
Which, to be fair, in every one of these cases, no one's particularly clear about that, right? Are we trying to solve for the problem of big tech being mean to big tech? Does anybody really care if Google's mean to Apple?
Right.
No. Are we trying to solve for the problem of big tech being mean to other businesses? That's, Google's advertising policies. That's Amazon and their relationship with their marketplace sellers. That's right. Facebook and their relationship with literally everybody because Facebook.
Right.
That's, this Apple and the App Store issue that we're seeing slowly unfold between them and whichever developer it is that they annoyed. Right? Is it tech being mean to people? And that's your privacy concerns. That's right. User data exchange. That's the ability and portability of your data. Are we talking about big tech being mean to competitors like the startup space, potential viable competitors?
Yep.
That's a potential issue, but maybe it's not. Are we talking about bad people using tech? And that's a bad thing.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I think you have all these different problems, and each one of these requires a different solution. And to your point, Aaron, not all of these are competition problems.
Nope.
Some of these are regulation problems. Some of these are human problems. Like bad people using tech just happens when you connect 5 billion people in 2 decades. Some of them are bad people.
Yeah, we don't have that governing system. We all got thrown into the deep end of the pool. And
exactly.
Inevitably, you're going to have an issue there, and don't even get us started about filtering of I should say privacy mining of underage youth. We just talked about this on the show here this week. So there's a mess of stuff out there, and you're right. There's not one solution. So part of any government's responsibility in this space is to mature and grow into their responsibilities across this multivaried landscape. It's not the same scenario of just break up a company and fracture it into other spaces, because it again, that's the most rudimentary concept, and it has nothing to do with the solutions that you're trying to solve as you just went through the entire bullet list right there. So what does this all mean to the digital consumer? We got big tech. We got big tech being attacked, so to speak, with lawsuits and different FTC complaints. What does that do to the digital consumer? Because ultimately, there's a protection goal from the government, but at the same time, and let me pause and side note here for another concept here, is that we're also looking at these big tech platforms as more utilities than anything else. They've gone so far, they've permeated our existence so far, especially for COVID and what we've just gone through. Big tech saved our ass. I mean, we have to put it on the block there is that Zoom technology saved companies from going under, to be able to be honest with you. So, I mean, we have to understand we're in a new playing field, and there are new responsibilities of companies now that there's such a reliance on this technology for economy as well as of connectivity. So we've got the Bell issues out there, and we have this utility concept, but it's not the same as what utilities used to be either. So, I mean, what's your thoughts on that rant that I just gave you?
No, I think there's some truth there. I mean, the word utility in the U.S. lexicon is charged, right? That means a really specific thing, and maybe that applies here, maybe it doesn't. Mm-hmm. But you're talking about. I mean, at the core of the utility law was this kind of idea that you mentioned. That I think you have to take a step back before you have a utility conversation. You have to talk about network effects, because that's kind of where the utility conversation comes in,
right?
At least in part. So the idea of a network effect is that as each incremental user or whatever node is added to a network, the network itself becomes more valuable. Mm-hmm. And we see this really clearly in social media, right? If no one's on a platform, the platform's not worth jack.
Right.
But when 2 billion people are on the planet or on the platform's worth a lot. And that's why Facebook is worth a lot. You don't go to Facebook for the sake of Facebook. You go to Facebook because that's where your friends are.
Right.
We saw this same kind of thing, honestly, in the Microsoft case. But in there, I think what the government got wrong, and what I think they're getting wrong again, is the network effects for Office are really different than the network effects from the Internet Explorer, right? People didn't use Windows, or they didn't use Word because it was pre-installed on Windows. They used Word because everybody else used Word.
Right.
Right? The network effect was internal to the product. And the same thing you see here is people don't use Facebook because they own Instagram. People use Facebook because their family and friends are on Facebook. I mean, I don't use Facebook, but
yeah,
exactly.
It's out there, and there's other needs. And had it been just for Family Connection, right, then we wouldn't be having a discussion here. It's the monetization of these platforms that has really turned the corner on being a target, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's the monetization, it's the scale, in some ways there are some allegations of anti-competitive conduct. Mm-hmm. That's always a problem, mm-hmm. right? You start to hurt people. But then there's also what I'm going to call the regulators' discovery of how every other business works. Everyone's getting mad at Amazon for their third-party sellers.
Right.
Guess what? Walmart's done this for years.
Absolutely.
And before they did it, CVS did it. And before CVS did it, Sears did it.
Right.
They all do it. This is just how retail works.
Yep.
Do you think Walmart lets people into their stores for the fun of it? No. Do you think Walmart collects all this ring data for the fun of it? No. They get their ring data. They have their POs from their suppliers. They know exactly what your COGS are. They know exactly what your probability thresholds are. And what do? They call up your same manufacturer,
right, and
they get the same product for cheaper. They slap a good value label on it, and they sell it right next to your product in their store. That is how Walmart works.
In a lot of ways, that's how capitalism works. So
exactly
is the challenge.
That's not bad. No. That's just business.
That's just business, and I think it's just been magnified to such a scale, right, and Amazon was the first to do that. So now we are dealing with another issue of, are people just pissed that profitability came along for the ride?
I mean, probably, but I think a lot of people, in some ways, right, this conversation about how these platforms operate ends up devolving, like you said, into this conversation of people are angry, people see things they don't like. Mm-hmm. There are allegations, for instance, Facebook had this, my God, I don't even remember them anymore because they were so ridiculous. This data lawsuit that I'm completely blanking on. You know what I'm talking about?
Yes, I do. It starts with a C, and I can't bring it up either.
Cambridge Analytica.
Cambridge, there we go.
Right. Facebook had this huge Cambridge Analytica data breach, which the UK Competition and Market Authority came up with a comprehensive report and basically just said, this really wasn't what they made it out to be. This was just fraud.
Right.
Which just fraud is bad. let's be clear, but it's not like they had like all this insidious things and, they came out and basically said they really couldn't do the things they said they could.
Right.
But
at the same time,
but for 2 years, you have this out in the marketplace, right? People are pissed because they think their data is being weaponized. They think that, their information is being bought and sold, and they're right in some extent. How much it matters is another question.
And that's the thing. It says hyper-reactive perspectives on this. You've got profitability, huge growth in these platforms. You've got the new environment of privacy and even the concept of digital ID, and it all is a pretty ugly stew of again, reactionary components. And then you have a governmental body that has no bloody clue what the industry even does. Right. So you throw that into the mix, and now you have these they're not arbitrary, but you have these lawsuits that are, again, using archaic laws to try to do some brain salad surgery on something. And it's just not going to work.
No, it's not. And I think you see that really clearly in the Google case. But before that, the U.S. House's report on antitrust that came out over the summer was basically a freshman college report with like complete with the spelling errors and the ridiculous logic and the 17-year-old charts. Like it was really of, if, like a student that, I had whatever, turn that in, they'd be getting an F, but that passes in the U.S. Congress these days.
Oh, okay. So with that note, let's wrap up our first segment of this important discussion with Sam Tomlinson. We're going to cover in our second episode the immediate issues that are facing Google and Facebook regarding antitrust and privacy that's been building, as well as what this means to the digital marketer, because this is what it's really all about, what the digital marketer needs to be empowered and aware of going into this year and the next, because this stuff's not going away, folks. So we got started with what is antitrust and what the rigors of archaic laws from 1890 coming to bear regarding certain number of antitrust lawsuits starting to bubble to the surface here for Google. Amazon, Apple is also kind of in the mix in its developer network, as well as Facebook. So we were actually just dovetailing into our previous conversation, our previous segment. We were talking about what's happening from the government standpoint, that there's so many things that are changing, brand new environments. We can't bring an old law. We literally need to follow in the EU's example of creating new laws, because there is new technology, a new environment, a new ecosystem. We just can't shatter a platform or a company and break it into pieces like they did with Ma Bell, right? There's just no place for that.
Right. I agree with that. I think, my general position is every one of these companies has huge network effects, right? Mm-hmm. And breaking up Google, what do you do if you split off Google and YouTube? Are people going to stop using Google search because they don't have YouTube anymore?
Nope.
No. People are going to stop publishing videos to YouTube? No. Is YouTube going to open up their own search engine to compete with Google? No. Right. Why? Because it takes a huge investment of resources so that you could be like the 9th most popular search engine and try to get market share. Likewise, Google with YouTube, like Google split from YouTube. So post YouTube Google isn't going to open up another YouTube, because why?
Right.
How do you compete? You don't. So you just end up in this situation where maybe you have more companies, but like you said, does that actually make anything better? For a user, probably not. It probably actually harms privacy, because that's more companies that have more of your data.
Right.
From an advertiser standpoint, maybe you get some lower rates, but maybe you don't, because each one of these companies now has more overhead. So maybe you do, maybe you don't, but you also have more to manage now too. You're not just managing Google, which now you're not managing Google and YouTube. Before you split up Facebook, Instagram, WhatsApp, now you're managing Facebook, Instagram, and WhatsApp.
Right.
So you've gone from having to manage 2 platforms to managing 5 or 10 or 15. And for a small business, that likely means a really significant expense. So from a breakup standpoint, I don't think you gain anything. I don't think you make the markets more competitive, because these markets, like we talked about in the last section, they have winner take all effects. The network effects in these platforms are huge. So And we saw this most recently, if anybody needs a proof of that, of TikTok.
Right.
TikTok is the fastest platform to ever get to 1 billion users. You know, a year ago, we were talking about, oh, it's like 300 million. That's kind of interesting. And then poof, it's over 1 billion, and it's become a worldwide phenomenon overnight.
Right.
Seemingly, right? But that's what network effects do. And people don't use, people use the platform because everybody else is now on the platform. The platform has become exponentially more valuable as their user base has increased.
Absolutely. So you have the growth of these platforms that are unbridled, but more importantly, these large platforms, there's also something regarding innovation and the growth of innovation at scale that is happening with. I mean, think about the growth of YouTube prior to the Google buyout, right? And
it was relatively slow. It was significant, but it wasn't what you saw now post Google.
Absolutely. So there's so many new innovations in the YouTube market space because it's got Google as the backer, right? Correct. So the counter argument to the fracturing of these brands, these organizations, is literally what happens whenever an incubator like Google can get a hold of a company and purchase. There's still a commerce level. They're still buying. Mm-hmm. I mean, I can't even remember what the amount was for Google, for YouTube, but it was sizable. And everyone,
$1 billion, wasn't it?
That was nuts. And everyone, so you better believe the stockholders or the principals of the company benefited from what they built. So there's still, you got to look at it in this space as well, is that as much as competition is very important, the innovation for the consumer, the digital user, right? What the user is actually benefiting from that incubation, it's certainly a powerful incentive for businesses to combine efforts, right?
Oh, 100%. I mean, I think if you look at the big four, so Google, Apple, Amazon, Facebook, over the last 20 years, they've purchased directly over 800 companies.
Wow,
that's huge,
that
right?
Is
I mean,
amazing.
that's right. And these are combinations of major acquisitions that we've all heard of, like the WhatsApp acquisition, the Instagram acquisition, the YouTube acquisition, but also hundreds of smaller ones. And many of these companies that were acquired previously acquired, right? So you're talking about a total food chain in the thousands of companies. And that represents a ton of incentive for founders, but also a ton of capital that goes into the system, right? Like venture companies love acquisitions. If a venture fund's investing in you and you say, hey, this is a technology that could get acquired by Google and there's precedent for it, that's a really nice exit scenario, because the only other exit scenario was going public, and that's really difficult to do. Or, now we have SPACs, but whatever, it's the same concept.
Right. Absolutely.
So it's, to your point, it's fostering innovation, but then there's also the down market innovation that every one of these lawsuits really ignores. And if you go back to 2010, 2009, and you look at the MarTech 5000, right? The biggest marketing technology companies on the planet. There were like 120 of them. Today, there's over 7,000 companies. So in the span of a decade, we've gone from 120 something companies to over 7,000. That's like a compound annual growth rate of like 120%. That's a huge industry that employs tens of thousands of people and contributes millions and millions and millions of dollars economically. Just in the marketing technology piece, that doesn't count like the millions of people employed by Amazon, Apple, Facebook, and Google themselves. That doesn't count the millions more supported by those industries, directly and indirectly. So these are huge economic engines for the United States.
Absolutely. If you, as a sidebar, remember that infographic, that MarTech infographic, and we had a developer of that on our show a while back. I got to go resurrect his name. It escapes me right now, but I remember that graphic at one point in time being 120 companies, and they just couldn't keep up. Literally, you can't make that infographic anymore. It's just one big cluster of logos.
But crazy.
It is crazy. So there's two sides of everything, obviously, but there are still key moral and ethical principles of doing business. And this is where antitrust lives. Even if it is an archaic set of laws, we still have to respect the principles of doing business. So, for example, Facebook. On December 9th, the FTC sued Facebook. This is December 9th of last year. They sued Facebook for illegal monopolization. According to the FTC complaints, Facebook is the world's dominant personal social networking service and has a monopoly power in a market for personal social networking services. According to the FTC's complaint, Facebook targeted potential competitive threats to its dominance, one being Instagram, right? They tried to compete with Instagram on the merits of improving their own platform, their own offerings, but they chose to buy Instagram rather than compete with it. That seems to be capitalism right there. It doesn't seem to be any type of monopolization. They chose to buy the company. They acquired Instagram for $1 billion in April of 2012. And they neutralized their threat posed by Instagram, but also making it more difficult for another personal social network competitor to gain scale. Gain scale is the important factor there, right?
Correct. Yeah. I mean, and the FTC complaint is basically like, we want a do-over. Because the thing that they really skirt around, and it's like 2 sentences, is, oh yeah, these deals went through FTC review.
Yeah.
Like, it's really important to remember that the FTC reviewed both the IG deal and the WhatsApp deal, and they signed off on both.
Absolutely.
And following those deals, Facebook did integrate the platforms. And yes, the integration is, anybody that works on Facebook knows that it's like not great. Let's be candid. But, you know, it wasn't like, oh, we bought this company for $1 billion and now it's worth $100 billion, so that was bad. It's no, we bought this company for $1 billion and we invested tens of billions into it.
There it is, yeah.
Of Facebook's cash flow and shareholder money, and now it's worth a lot more. So yeah, I think they definitely bought it to neutralize a threat. I mean, that's clear. But my comeback to that is, you had a review. You had the chance to review this deal. You said it was kosher,
right? And
now you're like, oh, wait-sies, take-backsies. That doesn't work. Like, any kid that goes to elementary school that makes a card trade knows that you don't get take-backsies. Like, that doesn't happen.
Is that a legal term?
That is a legal term, actually. I think it's Latin.
No,
I've not gone to law school, but I need to look that up.
I have not either, but I'm just saying, like, you don't get to try again every time you fail.
No, like, you're absolutely right. You're absolutely right.
I think. And yes, to your point, there is the scale issue, right? But the scale issue, I think, is, we talked a little bit about TikTok before. If Facebook is so dominant, why is TikTok over 1 billion users?
Right.
Why is Snapchat's market cap quadrupled in the last year from $15 to almost 60 a share, right? These companies are not, Facebook is obviously a very large, and it is the world's largest social media entity. But to say that no one can ever compete, I think, is wrong. And I think the emergence of TikTok really puts an exclamation point on that, because if you actually look at where Facebook is dominant, the platform itself is really skews a little bit older. But if you look at, for instance, what's the relevant market here? And that's a huge antitrust question. But in this case, it's like, well, most US teens don't use Facebook and they don't use Instagram. They use Snapchat and they use TikTok.
Right.
And
so, I mean, to put a pause there for a second, is that the user behavior is constantly evolving, and the platforms are rushing to be able to find services to be able to feed that consumer-driven desire, right? So TikTok and more visual platforms have exploded here over the course of the last 2 years. So there's no monopolization. And again, I'm no scholar in that space whatsoever, but monopolization has to also do with a finite amount of commerce as well. Commerce just blew out the side over there on TikTok. And and the teens went over there, and all us old fogies are still posting pictures of our dogs on Facebook, right? So it's about the diversity in the marketplace. It's also about the incubation of these platforms and what they can do and bring to scale innovation so more quickly. Now, in the Facebook side of things, they also levied the monopolistic tendencies of buying WhatsApp, which was the clear category leader in the messaging app space, and Facebook bought them in 2014 for $19 billion. But here's on the Facebook side, this was one that really was an issue. the third-party apps and they're making the APIs that connect to Facebook available under certain conditions that other third-party developers don't develop competitive services with their API connections. So even that is a protective measure and could arguably be legitimate in other commerce places, but because it's Facebook, because it's so big, this just seems like a level of extortion, or I should say a level of manipulation of removing the opportunity of competitiveness from those other third parties, right?
Yeah, I mean, in some cases, I think that's probably Facebook's weakest argument. I mean, you mentioned the mergers themselves. My position on those is basically, you bought them. Yep. You had the chance to review them. You could have said no. You didn't.
Yep.
Live with it.
Yep.
And if you want to regulate, then by all means, regulate. But that requires you to understand the business. That requires you to understand the tech stack. That requires you to really invest in crafting those regulations that will address the issues that you really want to reach. And I think that's key. The developer access and the predatory kind of conduct around the developer piece is potentially a vulnerability for Facebook, but it's one that's easily addressed with regulation, right? You have the same kind of issues in banking. It's just different access being granted in different ways to do it, right? Like a bank's not going to give another bank a loan to compete with themselves,
right? But
you have ways to avoid this.
That's a good parallel. Yeah, absolutely.
And you have ways to regulate it.
Yep.
So we can do that, and we just need to invest in doing that. And I think the first part of that becomes, what are the issues that you actually want to solve for? And again, I think I mentioned this in the last episode. No one's really been clear about what exactly we're upset about. We're upset. We're very clear that we're upset. But when we start to dig into the problems, what exactly are we mad about? Are we mad about tech being mean to tech? Are we mad about tech being mean to WPP and big advertising agencies? Because I don't really give a shit.
It's just the game, guys.
Right, exactly. Like, are we mad about tech harming competition and innovation? Are we mad about tech being mean to their customers, like advertisers? Right. Are we mad about tech being bad to people and privacy? Are we mad about bad people using tech?
Right.
And once you're clear about that issue, then I think you can start to think about some targeted interventions that will allow you to do this. Because the other part of this, and I think it's really important to understand, is you are basically trying to prove that one company did something that was against an 1890 or 1914 law and then design an intervention for it rather than solving the global problem. Like, you're trying to slap duct tape on a leaky cast iron pipe instead of just saying, hey guys, the pipe doesn't work anymore. Let's just put in a new pipe.
Just need to make the pipe out of flex tape. That's what you need to do right there.
Oh yeah, like the that Flex Seal commercial. Absolutely. Where you can make the whole boat out of Flex Seal.
Exactly.
And
just make a new boat, make a new pipe. All right, so that actually pivots over to our last car on the train here, and that's Google and antitrust. And to be fair, I want to. This deserves its own show, honestly. This particular topic, but we'll cover a couple key suits that are happening here and wrap up the. The issue is when a company controls every part of the digital advertising pipeline, right, and gives priority to its own services, there's a problem. Okay.
Yeah.
So that is a core concept into these legal battles from the New York Times, quoting, if they're a pitcher, they're a batter, and the umpire, all at the same time, then there's truly unfair practices that could be happening. So in October, the U.S. Department of Justice filed a landmark lawsuit alleging that Google unlawfully boxed out competitors by reaching deals with phone makers, including Apple and Samsung, to be the default search engine on their devices. A later lawsuit filed by nearly 40 attorney generals on December 17th of last year, literally 15 days ago, right, alleges that tech giant search results favored its own services over those of more specialized rivals, a tactic that harmed competitors. So we got that, and then the complaint came a day after 10 other states, led by Texas, accused Google of engaging in false and deceptive and misleading acts while operating its buy and sell auction system for digital ads. So
They got problems.
Yeah, they do. And Google's been accused of hurting competitors by giving priority to its own search results. So they're in the bidding war. They're in the ad war, and Google's own ads for their own products are coming up in front of competitors that are buying and vying for eyeballs and clicks on their own spaces. So that's the root. That's the key principle of this anti-competition, this monopolization, this antitrust issue. So what say you on that one?
So let's break this up because there's a lot to do here. So let's do Texas first, and then we can talk a little bit about search. So Texas, I think, has probably the strongest argument total. And the Texas lawsuit is going after the ad tech stack. So what we're talking about is basically Google for Publishers, Ad Exchange, and then Google Ads that most digital marketers use as the buy side platform,
right?
And the Google 360 suite, right? And basically what that case is alleging in the broad strokes is that Google is operating each of these in a way to exclude competition and to self-preference.
Right.
And there is some significant documentation here about that. And they do have, and like I said, I think this is probably the strongest case they have that I've seen. Mm-hmm. And it's probably the most detailed unpacking of the ad tech stack that's been done in a regulatory filing in the United States. So in some ways, that's actually good that regulators are taking the time to understand what's happening.
Absolutely.
Where I think things start to go off the rails in my mind is there is a ton of illusion throughout this entire 130 plus page filing about financial systems and instantaneous trading and real-time bidding. And you're basically trying to make this kind of connection between the financial system and the digital advertising system and say that if it's bad in the financial system, then it's bad in the digital advertising system. And in my mind, that doesn't follow because the financial system, we have regulations that say that's not okay. But in the digital advertising space, we don't. Right? Like, yes, it uses some of the same infrastructure, but just because you use the same infrastructure doesn't mean that you are bound by the same principles and the same laws because, quite frankly, Congress had the opportunity to put those regulations in place and they did not. So, yeah, there is definitely a problem with Google self-preferencing, and that's likely to be met with, at the very least, some significant regulatory intervention, which from a digital advertising standpoint should be welcome news.
Right. There's a sidecar to that particular topic as well. It's not part of the actual lawsuit, but it's also in public opinion. There's been reports of the demonetization of certain types of websites that were news websites that were more conservative leaning, that all of a sudden were not being able to benefit from the AdSense platform that they had actually previously engaged on. So there's a whole another space, and we won't tap into that because that's going into. Oh, goody. Because let's just. So I have no sympathy for news publications. I'm sorry, I have zero. You had a golden run. You paid overpaid salaries. You relied on an antiquated business model. You failed to adapt, and now the Darwinistic price is due, and you can't pay it. I don't feel bad for you. If you would have invested in the digital tools and tactics like so many other news publications have, you wouldn't be in this position where you're relying on a third party who is under no obligation to provide you with anything to support your bloated company. There it is.
Sorry.
I wanted to give him a swing at that, and he took the skin off that ball. All right.
It's getting hot in here.
All right. So, but I wanted to do that because I knew you were going to go there. It's about their own system. So coming back around to it, the final kind of argument about this is Google's platform.
Yes.
If you're playing in Google's platform, they have full rights to be able to change their environment, right? Mm-hmm. And the same argument is done inside of SEOs. How dare Google change their algorithm? How dare they change how we rank? And I mean, everybody's hair goes on fire whenever there's a core algorithm change, but it's their frickin' platform, right?
Exactly.
At the end of the day, they're in control because they're trying to give the best content to the consumer. Sorry, I went on a rant there, but that's the thing.
I think so. I mean, but Google, I think there's a couple pieces to this, right? Mm-hmm. The first is Google changes the algorithm and they don't tell us what it is. That's their prerogative.
Mhm.
It's their platform, like you said. And honestly, if you don't want to be reliant on their traffic, there are other ways for you to build a business outside of SEO.
Absolutely.
Plenty of companies have built very successful businesses with very low reliance on organic traffic.
I shame them publicly because of that, but go on.
Right. But
yes,
but
absolutely.
The fact is that it's an optional service, and they're under and everyone that you're competing with is in the same bucket, right? It's not like Google is saying, hey, Site Strategics, here's the new ranking algorithm. Let's go talk about this in secret.
Yeah.
And, we're not telling the other people about it. No, like everyone's in the same boat, which is the whole reason the SEO community commiserates around the core updates, because we're like, what happened? We don't know yet.
Everybody's uniformly screwed. Yeah, exactly.
Exactly.
It's nonpartisan.
But, exactly. There's nonpartisan screwing. That's good. But that's your first piece is everyone's in the same boat. And if you don't want to be reliant on this, then build your business in a different way.
Exactly.
Don't cry when you're not given a gift anymore. It's like the trust fund kid that gets cut off. Don't cry.
Right.
You did it, right? Like it's not yours to begin with. It's theirs. The second piece I would say on this is the Google competing and Google offering similar vertical search.
Right.
So this is one where you get into a bundling conversation. And this is always a really uncomfortable conversation because let's start with acknowledging the hard truth.
Mm-hmm.
Most vertical search engines sucked.
Correct.
No one liked going to TripAdvisor. No one likes going to Booking.com. No one likes Yelp.
No,
right?
Even Yelp doesn't like Yelp.
No one. Yelp doesn't even exactly. Like they're awful. But you want to cry about getting downranked? Build a better platform. I mean, Google is very clear and explicit about what they want.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, they publish the quality raters guidelines, which are a really nice directional indication of where they want the algorithm to go.
Right.
They offer plenty of tools, ranging from the Search Console tools to, Lighthouse, et cetera, for any webmaster or any owner to understand what they're looking for.
Yep.
And if you want to be like one of those platforms and litter your page with pop-up ads and bad user experience and bad results and shady stuff, don't be surprised when Google doesn't want to tie its reputation to you, which is what it does every time it ranks you high on page one. It's saying this is a credible site, that's a credible result, that is responsive to your query.
Right.
Well, they're not going to do that. They were like, well, you know what? You all suck. We're just going to do it better. And they did. Google reviews, does anybody really want to say Google reviews aren't better than Yelp reviews? Maybe there's some diehard Yelp people that watch this show that are going to say, Sam, you're an idiot. But, I think Google reviews are better. There's no sign up required. I don't have to give them any information.
Yep.
They don't harass me. They just tell me what it is, right? Does anybody not use Google Flights? It's
there.
I even planned. It's fantastic. They've built a better product. They looked at what was going to the marketplace and they built a better product.
Right.
How is that any different from what Sears did on hardware? How is that any different from what Walmart does or Target does with their products, where they look and they say, all of you suck. We're just going to do this better. And we can. And what does that do?
Yep.
It pushes innovation, is my argument. It's the same thing Apple with a flashlight app. Apple built a flashlight app. There were 800 flashlight apps before Apple built a flashlight app.
Yep.
What happened? All those developers went and built other apps because now there's no money in flashlight apps. There's no money in exploiting a basic service.
Yep, I know.
And we've had this argument over and over again throughout the US's kind of history. But if you go back to the 50s, cars didn't come with seatbelts or turn signals. Those were separate industries. Automakers were like, well, this is stupid. Let's bundle it together. And that's what happened over the late 50s, the 60s, and then finally the law in 1973 that required seatbelts that they fought tooth and nail. We have the same thing in tech with Microsoft.
Yep.
If you went to Excel, when I was growing up, everything was an add-in. You had to pay for everything.
Oh, gosh, that's right.
You had to pay for a web browser. You got those AOL CDs and those AOL floppy disks in the mail. And you had to actually get a floppy disk to get a web browser.
Yep.
But then the platforms are kind of this is stupid.
So you're talking evolution, business evolution of capitalism. I still wish I could buy those additional keyboard apps. I think I bought 4 or 5 for my iPhone way back when, until they scooped up that particular.
Right. But I think that's the conversation is you're
Yeah.
saying, well, what is core and what is ancillary and what is value add to the consumer? And I think in each of these cases, especially as Google's concerned,
Yep.
their products are beneficial to the consumer. They are
Bam.
not necessarily beneficial to the business. And I think some of their tactics in fueling them, like the Genius Lyrics thing, that
Yep.
was like, I mean, if you're going to steal content, give credit. That they were absolutely wrong in that. But if Google's going to say, hey, we're just going to become an answer engine, which is what they've said publicly in their filings for almost a decade now.
Right.
I mean, I'm not going to fault them for it because they telegraphed the move. And if you didn't see it coming and you don't evolve, then, well, Darwin comes for everybody.
So there's, in your mind, there's no space for if there's bad business or bad business ethics, that's a regulatory opportunity. Right there.
That's problematic.
But when it comes down to the natural evolution of capitalism and business, you can't be pissed at a company that goes at scale. If they have the monetization to be able to do it, be able to acquire companies, guess what? Both companies benefited from that particular purchase, and that's always ignored. It just happens to, roll with what they're trying to do and what they're trying to innovate with. So that's not a problem.
See this with Warren Buffett. Like Warren Buffett is celebrated as an American hero. This man's bought like 70-something companies.
Yep.
He bought like one of those candy companies he bought for pennies on the dollar, and it's a cash cow, right? But he bought utilities, he bought rail cars, he bought everything. And he saw an opportunity. Yep. He invested money. Like you said, both sides benefited in those transactions. And now he's got, Berkshire Hathaway, which is a, $100+ billion conglomerate that's, really one of the most well-stewarded companies in America. But he built it the same way. It's just, no one cares about chocolates and railroads. They care about apps and maps.
Apps and maps. There it is. Well, I mean, they obviously we're going to be watchers of this entire process going through, and there is, and I'm hearing from guests on a regular basis on the show. There's a plea to government, the Senate, and representatives and regulators to actually understand this environment more, and actually ask to build a consortium of subject matter experts to be able to consult, because the last thing you want is these legislative and regulatory initiatives that are armed with, again, archaic tools. They don't understand the context of what has happened, and they don't understand the user's experience is also a prime interest at the table. It's not just the consumer, it's not just the businesses, it's not just the competition and the lack thereof discussions. The users are also going to suffer if you break apart these organizations and turn it into alphabet soup, right?
Right. I mean, you're going to have users potentially suffering, but you're also going to have businesses suffering.
Yep.
Like if a business can't get answers to questions, that's a problem. Google is one of the largest sources for job applications, for instance, at this point, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
They're dominant. That's a core fundamental operation, or a core fundamental component of the economic operation of this country and of the world economy, is the ability of talent to move back and forth. People can't find jobs that are open and employers can't find qualified people. That's a huge problem, right?
Absolutely.
If people can't connect with one another, that's a problem in a digital economy. So I think you have to start, like you said, there's trade-offs, right? There's the privacy concern, and how do we handle that? And what are the appropriate privacy measures that strike this balance between protecting users' information, but also not overburdening business with huge compliance costs, and simultaneously allowing innovation, because really regulation is a regressive tax. It is going to hit the smallest companies hardest. So, you have to look at that and say, okay, well, how much innovation are we willing to stifle? What is the price that we're willing to put on privacy? How do we weigh an individual user's privacy versus a startup's trying to get those users and not necessarily being able to comply with really sophisticated privacy tactics and technologies?
Oh, that's a whole,
because those are expensive.
Yeah, that's a whole nother conversation right there.
How do we prioritize the needs of advertisers to understand where their investment is going and what they're getting for that investment with the needs of users to be protected when they search versus the need of competitors to be able to have access to that data. There's all kinds of really interesting trade-offs here, and then there's no easy answers. So I'm thrilled that Congress wants to get educated on this. But I think from a digital marketer's perspective, the biggest thing that's going to happen over the next year or two is nothing, because this is going to wind its way through the courts, and it's going to be, there's going to be some media headlines. But at the end of the day, is Google going to get broken up tomorrow? No. Right. Is Facebook going to get broken up tomorrow? No. Is anything really going to happen? Probably not. I mean,
a lot of lawyers are going to get paid. That's for darn sure.
Oh yeah, a lot of law firms are going to get real rich. But other than that, I mean, I think my biggest concern is always the simple, easy, and wrong answers.
Right.
I think we need to adjust that. We need to address this like we did the financial industry. That takes time. It takes practice. It takes incremental efforts that are both substantive in that they do rein in these problematic behaviors. And there are some. I'm not at all saying big tech is innocent. I don't want that to come across. But I just think they're being unfairly maligned because they're doing the things that everybody else has done for centuries. They're just doing it at a bigger scale.
There you go.
I mean, I think, when you talk about Amazon, is Amazon really a monopoly in e-commerce?
Or is it just the new evolution business?
Maybe, but Amazon's 40% of e-commerce, but they're 8% of total retail. So Walmart's 12%. Walmart's larger. Costco is larger.
Yep.
So I think you have to start thinking about these things like, okay, well, I think the most helpful thing to think about from a marketer standpoint is, number one, there are definite things that we could benefit from. I think, regulations that provide transparency and accountability to these platforms, that they have to provide accurate data, is a good thing. Every other product, you buy a product, you get very clear, it's very clear what you got. I think that's the case here, right? I think simplifying the ad exchange would be good.
And give a level of transparency as well.
Yeah, adding a level of transparency and allowing more competition there is probably a good thing. But then I think you also have to look at it and say, okay, well, are these really separate markets? And that's one of the questions that is going to have to be answered. But I mean, my initial reaction is, Google and Facebook compete for advertisers' dollars. I'm sure you see this with your clients. Yep. It's not money goes from Google to Facebook and from Facebook to Google, depending on CPMs, depending on platform activity, depending on results, right? It's not like these are two separate things that they don't ever, if Google all of a sudden spiked CPCs to look like LinkedIn, you would take the money off of Google and put it onto Facebook, potentially.
Absolutely. Well, maybe. That's a whole other.
Well, maybe.
That's a whole other
right?
can of worms there.
It's not like you are, it's not an either or, and it's not like Google has the ability to infinitely price search results, because they don't. Or search ad clicks. They don't have that ability. I mean, so I think you have to start asking, like, what's a relevant market? How do these markets interact? How do these market interactions impact advertisers and consumers and other businesses? And those are hard questions. So that's good that we're starting to have those conversations.
Absolutely.
I wish that we would not do it with a lawsuit, but sure.
Well, if anything, it starts the conversation. It starts the dialogue of evolution of business and evolution of these concepts, and it certainly starts with these type of discussions as well. So we do appreciate how much time you've been able to give us today on these concepts, and I certainly hope that we can kind of come back around and bring you back in for another bit of observation as these lawsuits progress, as these dialogues open up further. I think it's good to be able to kind of have a bit of a sidebar, so to speak, and unpack some of these things. So we appreciate your time today, Sam. We certainly want you to come back. What can we do to promote for you today? Give us a couple quick shout outs of yourself, where we can find you on social, and what else can we promote for you today?
I'm on social at Digital Sam I Am.
Yep.
That's Twitter, LinkedIn. I don't really use Instagram. I don't really use any Facebook products, but I have them. So that's fun. That's that. If you're looking for marketing or advertising services and you're in the market, love for you to check out Warshawski.com. Always appreciate new clients. If you are looking for speakers, I have a personal website, samtomlinson.me. Please check it out. I'm actually looking to fill up my 2021 speaking events calendar. So if you or somebody you know of is looking for a speaker on, well, antitrust things are fun, but generally it's SEM, paid social, digital strategy, analytics, finance related topics are fun too.
Yep.
Happy to do that. So would love to have any conversations. It's always fun. And
absolutely.
Like I said,
and there's going to be, I mean, honestly, our conferences are not going to be going away. So there's going to be more and more virtuals. And we're seeing some really good payoffs of the evolution of these virtual conferences. Doesn't hold a candle up to some of these the conferences of the past, and we certainly want to see them start back up. So hopefully in this year, maybe we'll come across your path in the real world as well, Sam. So thanks for
great.
Absolutely, and we'll have another steak dinner.
That sounds even better.
All right, so be safe, Sam, and be well, and we'll be talking to you soon. All right.
Awesome. Happy New Year, guys.
Happy New Year.
Talk to you soon.
All right. Don't forget to like and subscribe to Edge of the Web Radio on YouTube. And if you're really feeling up to it today, give us a quick review on iTunes as well. Let us know how we did on this interview, and give us some feedback and give us your opinions about these topics, because we certainly want to hear from our audience. Thanks to our sponsor, Site Strategic, title sponsor of the show. Be sure to check out all the must-see videos and audio over at edgeofthewebradio.com. Do not miss our digital news roundup that we have every Tuesday with Morty Oberstein as we go through the digital news of the week. So that's it for Edge of the Web Radio interview today. Check out the previous segment that we did with Sam in this from this show as well. Next show, we're going to be talking to Jason Bernard, but keep your eye on the dial as we push new content out of Edge of the Web as well. So from all of us over at Edge, stay safe, stay well, and do not be a piece of cyber driftwood. We'll talk to you next week. Bye-bye.